Hello, once again, welcome to my channel. This is Karthik. We just try to continue with the earlier class of exceptions concept. We straight away go with the topic. In the earlier class, we have discussed about what is exception, what are different types of exception, and we've seen some examples of compile time and runtime exceptions. Seen something like illegal state exception. We've seen array index out of bound exception, string index out of bounds exception, etc. We've seen some of the compile time exceptions like IOException, FileNotFoundException, ClassNotFoundException, so on. Today we just try to focus mainly on what are different exception handlers and why we need exception handlers. As we have classified the exceptions into two categories, compile time and runtime, how to handle the exceptions at compile time and runtime, we'll see. So example, we just straight away go for example, saying that exception demo2.java first we try to classify what are different kinds of exception handlers we have. See, exception handlers are classified into three different things. One is try, catch, finally. See, these are three different handlers in which exceptions can be handled. Try is a block which takes the exception and try for the code whether it can be able to handle any exception or not. The name itself has a meaning that try the logic and check if there is any possibility of getting any exception from that block. If that block gets any exception, say how the block look like is this is the way how it look like. Try block, in between this write some logic. The logic may or may not for exceptions. And catch is another kind of block where we handle the exceptions which are tried here. If any exceptions are being handled here, that exceptions can be caught here. So this is the logic where we write the exceptions where which we catch. And coming to finally, again finally is a block where the exceptions which are uncaught at try catch, they can be finally caught by finally block. So finally block, I can say it is a compulsory block where the exceptions can be handled without any kind of escape. So try, which tries the logic to find exception available or not, and catch is a block where we can take different exceptions into consideration. See the brackets beside the catch, inside this we mention some exception names. And finally is the exception block which compulsorily handles exception. And once we go back to the program and look how the exception look like first. So public static void main string args example. I just try to print a simple exception to show you what exception contains in the exception stack. I just say a simple thing as args of 0. Once compile a program saying that javac space exception demo2.java and java space exception demo2. When you observe this exception and the error of the exception, you can find different things into consideration here. See, one is the exception name and the exception reason and the exception location Okay, once try to write the things, what we see: exception name, exception reason, exception message, and location of that exception. See, these are all different kinds of things we can find an exception when it is raised. If you want me to show another one, say example, args of 0 dot say carrots of say 2, then you just try to run it again, compile, and say pass something like CSC, not only CS. Observe that we got exception here, saying that string index out of bound exception. This is exception name. The exception reason, the string index out of range 2 means the string what you have given is not in the range, and that is occurred at java.lang.string.caret. Because of the caret function, it occurred at line 3, and the location is this position. So this is a complete collection of exception stack: the name of the exception, the reason for the exception, the message for the exception, the location for the exception. So this determines that exception, and this is a reason, this is a message, and this is a location. So these are the 4 things you keep in the mind whenever you try to handle the exception explicitly, not implicitly like runtime exception. Okay, now we straight away go with the example of try catch block. Try is a block where we can try for the logic whether exception can be thrown, and catch is a block where the exception can be caught. Example, we just take a simple exception to understand. So write a block here, say try, and try is a block which contains something, say example int say x equals to, I want to say that integer dot parse int of args of 0 means I just want to read an value of x from the command and argument, that is args of 0. Okay, once it is read, I just want to say system dot out dot print line of x. In this example, what kind of exceptions we may experience? The first thing we experience is if I don't pass the argument here, that may leads to an exception, that is array index out of bounds, because string array, if I don't pass the argument, that may lead to first exception. So we should need to catch the exception. How to catch is say catch that exception name, what is that, array index out of bounds exception. This is a catch where I write the exception name followed by the object for the exception, and open that. And if the exception is raised, I want to print my message saying that system dot out dot print ln, the message is array index out of range. In the same manner, the second kind of exception we may even experience in this particular line is I'm trying to convert integer dot parse int. Then obviously we may even get the problem if the argument which I am trying to pass, if it is a string argument. If it is string argument, then obviously that argument cannot be converted, So this line again may create the exception if the argument which I pass is exactly an integer type. If it is not integer type, rather than it is a string or any other type, that may lead to another kind of exception. What exception? If you can guess, catch of number format exception. Space NFE, please enter some kind of message here. Just copy this statement and just paste that and change the message as please enter proper integer. And you can even go with few exceptions in the same program. For example, see, I have written 2 exceptions here. There is no reason that we need to write here. We can have single try catch block, we can have try with multiple number of catch blocks, because a same kind of logic may lead to multiple exceptions. Hence, at that situation, I can say that multiple catch blocks. That's it. And example, if you say here after x, say I want to divide the value of x with another value, say I create another value of y here, so copy and int y equals to integer dot parsing of args of 1, and I just want to say x by y. When I say x by y here, that again may lead to another exception. The exception can be an like if the value of x is a 0 value. Generally, the value of x should be non-zero. If the value of x is 0, that may leads to indeterminate kind of value. Generally, we call that kind of exception as arithmetic exception. Arithmetic exception is an exception which describes about the exception having arithmetic operations like that. So just copy and paste the message. The message is please enter non-zero value. Okay, done. My job was done. For the simple example, I have written 3 examples here. So finally, we have done the program with say we can say the multiple number of landmines here. Each landmine is each catch block, and whenever each statement executes, if depending upon the value which I give at runtime, that may lead to a runtime exception. If the index is not properly given here, that may lead to array index out of bound exception. If the position at the value for that y or x is not given as integers here, that may lead to an number format exception. If the value of y is 0, then leads to an arbitrary exception. Of course, this all comes under an exception called runtime exceptions. Let us execute the program and look how it do. So java c space exception demo2.java. It throws me an a small typo error saying that number format. So f, mind you, people always give class names of Java as capital letters. It is something like camel case notations. And again, try to compile the program. Okay, fine. Now run the program. Say we need to give 2 parameters here in the command line. So exception2 space gives in 2 values, exactly say 5 space 2. It gives value as 2 because 5 is args of 0 and 2 is args of 1, and 5 divided by 2 is 2 point something, and it returns the integer value, hence it returns a value called 2. And example, if I give something like, say I did not give any kind of argument 2 here and hit enter, so that says me array index out of range because the value args of 1 is not given. That leads to array index out of bound exception. And you can see another exception, say here if I give 5 space some kind of string, say a here, that leads to what? Please enter the proper integer. This message correlates to number format exception. And if we pass a good value, say 5 space 0, then it says please enter non-zero value because the value of y is given as 0, that leads to an arithmetic exception. So all the 3 exceptions are caught depending upon different abnormalities in this try block. This try block is a block which contains the logic. The logic may have some kind of deficiencies that seen at runtime. Depending upon each deficiency, that catch block will be caught. This is something like try and catch block. You may even keep a block called a finally block, which is a compulsory block that will be caught in situations where you does not have any block to catch, or generally we use finally block to maintain the connections of, say, closing of connections, say closing of database connection, closing of file stream connections, or say I want to remove the objects into garbage collection. Those kind of functionalities can be done in finally block. So for a case, I just say that simply print a message, say that I will always execute. Okay, we'll see the finally example, the further example which contains some kind of code. No worries. So run it again and compile it again. Exception demo2.java and enter some value 5,2. See, I got a value output as 2 and also got I will always execute. Irrespective of the any catch block, this block will surely execute. See, since all these are different runtime exceptions, all these exceptions can be replaced in one shot as runtime exception class, because this is a runtime exception, this is a runtime exception, this is a runtime exception. So all these can be replaced by a single catch block. Say example, I just cut this and I say catch of runtime exception space RE. I just try to show you that what happens if anything executes. Say I can handle any runtime abnormality. See, any kind of exception occurs, these 3 lines may leads to call this particular catch block. Maybe this, if I get error index out of bounds, if I get arithmetic exception, number format, all these are the subclasses of what? Runtime exception. So just try to execute this and say some logic here, say 5 without second parameter. See, I can handle any runtime abnormality, or say example 5 space some D, I can handle any abnormality, or say 5 space 0, of course same. These 3 are 3 different exceptions we have written earlier, and all these 3 can be handled by a single exception called runtime exception. This is a parent class of all exceptions, so it's always better to keep this exception at the last, followed by the exceptions what you have created. This is a hierarchy of exceptions. All child exceptions followed by the parent exception. This will executes and sounds good. Done. This is a runtime exception and exception handler. The same thing can even be written using a compile time exception also. The same logic can even be written using a compile time exception by keeping an exception handlers. If you create a new program here, say notepad space exception demo3.java, so class exception demo3, so public static void main. People, there is no rule that every program should be written only in the main function. You can divide the program into multiple blocks like methods, and you can even call them. Okay, so example, just try to create now compile time exception. One such is I just take say system.out.println. A simple example I'll start with Karthik, and after Karthik I just say thread dot sleep off. I say 2 seconds I want to sleep and I just want to print another one. Just copy another 2 seconds. Say example Karthik, Chandra and Patnaik. I just want to print this Karthik, Chandra, Patnaik with a time span of 2 seconds every time. When I compile this, you just try to observe what kind of exception you can experience. You get an unreported exception, that is interrupted exception, which is created. We seen this earlier video. This should be caught or this should be thrown. How to catch this? To catch this, we need to use a try catch block. Same like try, keep this in try block as try, keep a catch. The exception is what? You can even see the exception name in the error. See, that is interrupted exception. So interrupted exception space IE, and you can write some message here. Say if interrupted something, some unusual message. People, you can even just copy this and paste it here. Same logic. Now see, I have surrounded this particular statement with an try catch block. So compile now, it goes good, it won't have any error. Java space exception demo space. See, Karthik after 2 seconds, Chandra 2 seconds and Patnaik. So this has been printed with a time span of 2 seconds every time. Whenever we use this particular statement, we should need to throw an exception like interrupt exception. See, this kind of exceptions we call it as a compile time exception. Compile time exceptions should be handled compulsorily. If you don't handle this, you have seen some error, right? If you don't handle this, it will throw compulsorily a compile time error. Example, if I don't handle this, what happens? It will create a compile time error. The compile time error we have seen. Okay, so now the same example we have done even with the catch block with compile time exceptions. We can make multiple compile time exceptions, like we can even write for something like a file stream, say file input stream space object equals to new file input stream. I want to read a file of say d colon something, say csc.txt. I want to read a file called csc.txt. Okay, I don't worry about the next logic, I just try to read. So catch, if the file is not available, I should need to say file not found exception. Just say file not found F capital and simply just print some message inside this as file is not in the current path. Okay, we just compile the program and try to read a file which is located in D drive. Just if you look at my D drive, see my D drive doesn't contain any kind of file like csc.txt. Okay, now if I try to run the program, say java space exception demo 3.java, okay, the first thing I have found missing is I did not import, sorry, import here, because all this comes under IO package. So import java.io.star, because file input stream is an class of IO package. File not found exception is also a class of IO package. Now compile. Now it throws me an again error here, say file input stream, maybe the spelling is wrong here, file input stream. Okay, now once again, sorry for the typos. Done. So Java space exception demo 3, and when you run this, see the file is not in the current path because the file is not located. So this will be the issues when you are trying to work for a compile time exception. So if the file is located, if the csv.txt is present in the directory, example, say I just create a file here, say in that new, say a text file, say that as csv. Now again try to compile and check how it happens. See, now we got any kind of error here because the file which you are trying to access is present. So this is something like a try catch block that is being applied for the compile time exceptions. What happens if I don't keep this? If I don't keep this, example, if I remove this try catch block, that may lead to a problem. Which problem? A compile time error. Just compile this. See, when I compile that, it throws me unreported exception. Exception is created. So this will not make our program to run to further steps. So we need to handle. So we need to catch or we need to throw. Okay. So for that only we need to what? We need to catch. So we have got that by keeping in a try catch block. Once we compile this, so the error is gone now. This is all about try catch. As I said here, see, you can even keep something like a file output stream also. Say if you keep a file output stream or you have a file input stream, right? You can even do right here a finally block. Finally block after after being done the file input stream, we need to close the file because I have opened the file for reading. We need to close the file. So closing of file, sometimes we forget in the particular block. So finally is a block where we can do that kind of things. So closing of a file, because this finally block will be done at the last stage of the code execution. Hence, surely this block will be executed. So I can say fis dot close. When I say fis dot close, obviously once run the program, see maybe I have done somewhere wrong. Okay, here I have closed here. Okay, now close it here. Okay, now again run this. See, we have got some problem here. Fis dot close. The symbol is unable to find. The reason behind that is fis is an variable which was not found in the local. This is a separate block and this is a separate block. So I have to give this variable outside of this block so that the variable can be visible in this block. So I will say this declaration of the variable out of the class. So like this, hit on this and paste it here and make it as static. Static because if it is static, I can use in the main method. And here you just say fis equals to. Done. And again just run the program and check. See, again it throws me an exception here, that is unreported exception, that is IOException. This is an exception which will be experienced when you are trying to read some data. When I am trying to close an exception here, when I am trying to close a file here, the file will be closed once after the file is read. If the CSV has some data, I have read some data from CSV. Once the data is read, then this operation should be done, that is file close. Hence, before the file close, I should need to handle exception, that is IOException. So again, inside this finally block, keep a try block. Keep a try block and catch. The exception name is what? IOException space IOE. And you just try to print this simple one here. some messages. Thank you. Done. Once you compile it again and see, the no errors will be found now. So this is a one try catch block which finds the files to be read, and if file is not found, it throws a file not found exception. If file is found and you have done some file reading operations, say example, you can do a file reading operation like this, say fis.read example, some kind of read operation, say print some value here, say system.out.print line. I want to read some data here, say fis.read, a single character. Once that is done, finally I want to close the file. So once I read the file, then obviously I can able to go for the exception. So once the file is read, we should even need through another exception called reading is something like input output operation. So once we try to compile the program and look any kind of exceptions raised again. Okay, fortunately we again got an exception called IOException, because IOException will occur when you are trying to read the data, because in csc.txt it doesn't have any data available. So example, if I keep some data here, say Karthik, means the IOException is an exception that occurs in a situation where there is any problem in reading or writing a data. So input output exception. Hence this is thrown exception saying that IOException as an error when I am trying to read the data. So again here itself only I have to keep another catch block saying that catch of IOException space IOE. Okay, and simply print some statement here, data not available if the data is not available. Okay, done. Completely see, this is a try block, these are two catch blocks, this is a finally block. Instead of finally again I got try catch. There is no rule that we have to maintain this, but it is good habit of maintaining. So now compile this, done, and run this. See, I got 107, the ASCII value of the letter K, because in my file I have a text called Karthik. If you want to print Karthik K there, you just try to typecast this with char. I have just typecasted here with char. Means I have read an byte, I am trying to convert into what? Char. Convert this and print. See, we have got something called K. As we all know, file input stream is a byte stream. It always read bytes. Okay, we'll see this concept when we speak about the IO concept. This is something like the try catch finally concept. Hope we enjoyed the exception handlers try catch finally, and soon we come up with a new video. Mostly we go with throw and throws and user defined exception. Thank you, keep watching, goodbye.